Hey, well, good morning, everyone. Just want to continue on with our devotion. Just so you know that we do one at 10 a.m. and one at 8 p.m. We started a new book, and it's Max Lucado's book, Anxious for Nothing, and it's Finding Calm in a Chaotic World. I was looking at this book in my library, and I thought, this is quite fitting for where we're at. And so far we've talked a bit about belief, we've talked about anxiety, and we're going to pick it up still from last night. Let me just kind of peel back a little bit so we can remember what we were talking about last night. So he talks about this. He says, belief always precedes behavior. For this reason, the Apostle Paul, in each of his epistles, addresses convictions before he addressed actions. I don't know if you remember the tent pole narrative that he was talking about, where he went camping in his dad's tent with these cast iron poles. And so he talks about belief is like the tent poles of who we are. So here he continues on. He goes, the most important thing about you is your belief system. For Paul's was a Gibraltar strong. Take a close look at the poles in the tent of the apostle, and you will see one with this inscription, the sovereignty of God. Sovereignty is the term the Bible uses to describe God's perfect control and management of the universe. I'm going to repeat that one more time. Sovereignty, because it's one of those terms that we hear about all the time. And I think I'm going to move because I think I'm in a bit of a dead spot. Hold on. I'm going to be closer to my Wi-Fi, so bear with me. There. And I think it's because it's raining. Hopefully that is working. Okay. It still says it's recording, but okay. So it says, sovereignty is one of those kind of terms that we use in our Christian realm quite a lot. And a lot of people, if I was asked, kind of poll the audience, I'd be like, so what does that mean? What's like, I call it a walking man's definition. Like, what does it mean? And I'm amazed that a lot of people just don't know what it means. So here's what I love about Max Lucado. He kind of puts it in bite-sized pieces. So he says, sovereignty is the term the Bible uses to describe God's perfect control and management of the universe. He preserves and governs every element. He is continually involved with all created things, directing them to act in a way that fulfills his divine purpose. Isn't that such a great definition this morning? In the treatment of anxiety, a proper understanding of sovereignty is huge. Anxiety is often the consequence of perceived chaos. Oh, I'm going to read that again. Anxiety is often the consequence of perceived chaos. If we sense we are victims of unseen, turbulent, random forces, we are troubled. Psychologists verified this fact when they studied the impact of combat on soldiers in World War II. They determined after 60 days of continuous combat, the ground troops became emotionally dead. This reaction is understandable. Soldiers endured a constant threat of bomb blitzes, machine guns, and enemy snipers. The anxiety of the ground troops was no surprise. The comparative calm of fighter pilots, however, was. Their mortality rate was among the highest in combat. 50% of them were killed in action, yet dogfighters loved their work. An astounding 93% of them claimed to be happy in their assignments, even though the odds of survival were the same as the toss of a coin. What made the difference? Those pilots had their hands on the throttle. They sat in the cockpit. They felt that their fate was theirs to determine. Infantrymen, or the men on the ground, by contrast, could just as easily be killed standing or still or running away. They felt forlorn and helpless. The formula is simple. Perceived control creates calm. Lack of control gives birth to fear. You don't need a war to prove this formula. Road congestion will just do fine. A team of German researchers found that a traffic jam increases your chances of a heart attack threefold. Makes sense. Gridlock is the ultimate loss of control. We may know how to drive, but the fellow in the next lane doesn't. We can be the best drivers in history, but the texting teenager might be the end of us. There is no predictability, just stress. Anxiety increases as perceived control diminishes. So what do we do? Control everything? Never board a plane without a parachute? Never enter a restaurant without bringing your own clean silverware? Never leave the house without a gas mask? Never give away your heart for fear of a broken one? Never step on a crack lest you break your mother's back? Face anxiety by taking control. If only we could. Yet certainly is a cruel imposter. A person can accumulate millions of dollars and still lose it all in a recession. A health fanatic can eat only nuts and veggies and still battle cancer. A hermit can avoid all human contact and still struggle with insomnia. We want certainty, but the only certainty is the lack thereof. That's why the most stressed out people are control freaks. They fail at the quest they most pursue. The more they try to control the world, the more they realize they cannot. Life becomes a cycle of anxiety and failure, anxiety, failure, anxiety, failure. We can't take control because control is not ours to take. The Bible has a better idea. Rather than seeking total control, relinquish it. You can't run the world, but you can entrust it to God. This is the message behind Paul's admonition to rejoice in the Lord. Peace is within reach, not for the lack of problems, but because of the presence of a sovereign Lord. Peace is within reach. Rather than rehearse the chaos of the world, rejoice in the Lord's sovereignty, as Paul did. The things which happened to me have actually turned out to the furtherance of the gospel, so that it may become evident to the whole palace guard and to all the rest that my chains are in Christ. Philippians 1:12 and 13. And those troublemakers in the church, those who preached out of envy and strife, their selfish motives were no match for the sovereignty of Jesus. Whether their motives are false or genuine, the message about Christ is being preached. Either way, so I rejoice, and I will continue to rejoice. Philippians 1:18. Paul believed that God highly exalted Jesus and gave him the name above every name. Conditions might have been miserable in prison, but high above it all was a God who was at work in both you to will and do his good pleasure. So to read Paul is to read the words of a man who is in the innermost parts of his being believed in the steady hand of a good God. He was protected by God's strength, preserved by God's love. He lived beneath the shadow of God's wings. Do you? It's interesting this play that he's going on with sovereignty and the Lord, and being rejoicing in the Lord and rejoicing in the sovereignty of the Lord, and how it plays with combat soldiers. I know for me, I was trained as a combat soldier, infantryman, not a pilot. But I completely connect with that narrative, because there are times where you're just, we dug the trench and you're sitting for hours and hours and hours for something to happen. And your mind can just go in every direction. You can what's called catastrophize. You can catastrophize a situation like, this is where it ends. This is where, I'm going to be dead in this trench or whatever. And you start to do these mind games of the what ifs. And that's what he talked about earlier on in the chapter, about the what ifs equating to high anxiety. But then the reality is the fighter pilot, he's got his hand on the stick. He's flying a plane. They love what they do because there's a perceived sense of control. But the reality is both soldiers are, wrong in a way, because you're not really controlling anything. The only time we can actually give control is, or try to deal with control, is when we relinquish it. And I love that the idea of surrender, that we relinquish our rights or relinquish our control to Jesus, because Jesus is Lord and he sits at the right hand of God, and that he's still on the throne. He has not fallen asleep at the wheel. He's not woken up and go, hey, what's this COVID-19 going on? Like, he is very ever present in this situation. He's ever present in your home and in your heart and in your car and in your job, or with your kids doing homeschooling. He's ever present right now. That's because it's sovereignty, that he is very much involved in this universe that we're in. Well, I love you. God bless you. And I pray that you release your control to the Lord. I pray that you are able to surrender to a good Father. That song, I don't know if you can type it up on YouTube, but that song is just an amazing song, that he's a good Father. And another one that we love to sing at the church is Waymaker, that he is a waymaker when it comes to this perceived reality that we're in. We don't know if we're in level 4 or 3 or 3.5, but God does. God knows exactly what's going on, and he sits on the throne, high and holy and lifted up. The train of his robe fills the temple, and we say, holy, holy, holy. Well, bless you guys. We're praying for you, and we're believing for all of you to have healing and wholeness in this time. Take care, and we will talk to you soon. See you tonight. All right, 8 o'clock.